Welcome to Life Stories. Have you ever given everything you had to someone, only to be told it wasn't enough? Imagine pouring your heart into a family, doing everything you could to hold it together, only to be treated like you don't matter at all. This is the story of a mother who did just that, sacrificing everything for the people she loved, only to find herself left with nothing but regret. But what happens when she finally decides enough is enough? What happens when she walks away and leaves them to face the consequences of their actions? Stay with us because this is not just a story about family. It's about rediscovery, about taking back control, and learning that sometimes the hardest part of love is letting go. Now, let's begin the journey. The chill of early March still clung to the air, but the sun had begun to assert itself in small doses, enough to coax the earth into a tentative spring. Maggie stood alone in the garden, the smell of damp earth and dying flowers surrounding her as she moved mechanically, deadheading the last frostbitten mums. Her hands worked absent-mindedly, but her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the quiet that had filled her home ever since Harold's death. The phone rang, cutting through the stillness. Maggie wiped her hands on her faded apron and picked it up. Her son, Daniel, was on the other end. "Hey, Mom, how are you doing?" His voice was soft, almost too cautious. Maggie swallowed, trying to shake off the sadness that always seemed to hit her when she heard his voice now. They'd been drifting, a slow, steady distance growing between them ever since he'd married Jessica. She wasn't sure what happened, but the calls had become less frequent, the conversations shorter, more strained. "I'm fine," she lied, pushing away the overwhelming emptiness that filled the house. The same emptiness she felt every time she walked past Harold's old chair, untouched since the funeral. "I've been keeping busy. Working in the garden and going through some of Harold's old things." Daniel hesitated, and Maggie could hear the shift in his tone. He was gathering his words carefully, as if he was walking on thin ice. "We've been talking, Jessica and I. And well, we think maybe it's time you come live with us for a while. The kids miss you, and we have that extra room. It wouldn't be permanent, just for a bit." Maggie's chest tightened. Live with them? She hadn't seen much of them lately, not since the wedding. Jessica had always been distant, glued to her phone, her attention never quite on Maggie. And Daniel? He had been thinner, his eyes sunken as though the weight of responsibility had already begun to crush him. Yet, the thought of seeing her grandchildren, of feeling useful again, tugged at her heart. "I'll think about it," Maggie said quietly, her voice shaky with the unsaid. For the next week, she walked the empty house, past the photos of a life she once had, past the old armchair Harold used to sit in. The silence echoed in every corner. She thought about the long nights, making dinner for one, and the dull hum of the television in the background to mask the loneliness. Finally, she made up her mind. She packed a suitcase. Not everything, just enough for a long stay. The house, still quiet and empty, felt like a museum of her past life. It had stood there long enough, but the weight of its memories made her feel like an outsider. She drove to Daniel's house, hoping for something better, something that would make her feel like she was still needed, still loved. But when she arrived, no one greeted her. Jessica opened the door, her expression neutral. "You're early," she said, stepping aside to let Maggie in. The house smelled like takeout and diapers, toys scattered across the floor, and a loud cartoon blaring from the living room. Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a baby in one arm. He hugged her quickly, too quickly, as though the moment didn't deserve more attention. The guest room wasn't the clean, welcoming space she had imagined. Instead, it was cluttered with boxes, a broken lamp, and an air mattress instead of a bed. Maggie forced a smile. "It's fine," she said softly. "It'll do." That first night, Maggie lay on the air mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar noises of a house that felt more like a hotel than a home. She told herself it was temporary, that she was needed, but deep down, a part of her knew. This was no longer her family. This was just a place to rest her head, nothing more. Days passed, each one a slow slide into isolation. Maggie tried to help, offering to cook, clean, watch the kids, but nothing she did seemed to land right. Jessica barely looked at her. When she did, there was a faint look of irritation beneath her forced politeness. Daniel was either working late or retreating into the garage with a beer in hand, his attention always elsewhere. One morning, Jessica pulled her aside in the hallway. "Do you mind not using the washer during the day? The electric bill's been high." Maggie blinked, her breath catching in her throat. "Of course," she said, nodding as if the request was normal. But it wasn't. Each little comment, each silent judgment chipped away at her. She didn't belong here. She wasn't a guest. She was a burden disguised as a helper, expected to contribute without question. And then came the request for money. "Things are tight," Daniel said one evening, his voice casual. "If you could help with the mortgage, just until we get caught up, it'd mean a lot." Maggie stared at him stunned. "Of course," she said automatically without thinking. "Just tell me how much you need." She dipped into her savings that week, transferring enough to cover half the payment, thinking it was a one-time request. But the next month, and the next, Daniel asked again. It became expected, not asked for, but assumed. The cracks started to show. The tension between Daniel and Jessica was palpable, a silent battle fought in the corners of the house. Jessica's shopping bags from expensive stores were piled in the bedroom, despite constant complaints about money. Daniel's phone buzzed constantly late into the night. And yet, Maggie was still the one to help, the one to pay, the one to sacrifice. Finally, it all came to a head one evening. Maggie made the roast she knew Daniel loved as a child, hoping to connect, to remind him of the family they once were. But Jessica didn't come downstairs until after the meal, barely acknowledging the food. "I don't eat red meat," she said flatly, not even looking at Maggie. "Next time, just ask." The words landed with a sting, but it wasn't the insult that broke Maggie. It was the realization that, no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough. She wasn't wanted here. She was useful, yes, but only for what she could offer. That night, as the house settled into its familiar silence, Maggie sat on the edge of her air mattress and stared at the floor. She had been the one to sacrifice. She had been the one to give, over and over again, and now she was invisible. What is the cost of being the one who always gives, without ever asking for anything in return? How do you reclaim your life when your own family has made you feel invisible? The next morning, Maggie made a decision. She packed up her things quietly, leaving behind only a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for having me." She wasn't sure if anyone would notice, but she was done. She had given enough. It was time for her to walk away. She drove home, the road stretching ahead, her heart heavy but somehow lighter. When she walked into her house, it was like stepping into a different world. The silence, the peace, it felt like home again. But as she unpacked her suitcase, she felt something shift deep inside. She wasn't just reclaiming her space, she was reclaiming herself. Would Maggie's decision to leave finally give her the peace she so desperately needed? What happens when you stop sacrificing yourself for others and finally choose your own happiness? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where Maggie's journey to reclaim her life takes an unexpected turn. The days after Maggie's return were quieter than she had anticipated. There was no drama, no rush to fill the silence. She spent her mornings walking around her neighborhood, small steps on familiar streets, but this time with a new kind of awareness. The air felt sharper, colder, like it had cleared away the fog that had clouded her thoughts for so long. The stillness of her home was no longer an oppressive weight. It was freedom. It was peace. She had been working on small projects, sewing and crafting again, making things for herself. For the first time in years, her hands were busy creating something that wasn't just for someone else. Her small online shop was beginning to grow, each order a small, hard-won victory. It wasn't much, but it was hers. No one had to thank her for it, and no one was demanding it. But then one morning, as Maggie sipped her coffee and watched the sun break through the clouds, her phone rang. It was Daniel. She hesitated before answering, a knot forming in her stomach. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, and part of her had been relieved by the silence. The last time they spoke, it had felt like he was fishing for help, desperate, without any real understanding of what he was asking for. Mom, his voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. I, I need to talk to you. Can I come by? Maggie's heart skipped. The weight of his words felt different now, more urgent. She didn't want to let him back in, not after everything that had happened. But she couldn't deny the part of her that still cared deeply, the part that had spent years cleaning up his mess, keeping him afloat. Sure, she said quietly, trying to sound composed. Come over. An hour later, Daniel's car pulled up in front of her house. He got out slowly, his shoulders slumped, his usual confident slouch gone. Maggie opened the door and her breath caught in her throat. He didn't look like her son. He looked like a stranger, tired, broken, and smaller than she remembered. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Can I come in? Maggie stepped aside, wordlessly. She watched as he shuffled into the living room, his eyes scanning the familiar, yet now foreign space. It felt like a lifetime ago that they sat here together, laughing, talking, sharing meals. Now the space between them seemed too wide to bridge. He sat on the couch, even his hands trembling in his lap. Maggie waited, not sure what to say. She had no interest in playing the savior anymore, no desire to fix him or solve his problems. But there was something in his eyes, something desperate and raw, that made her hesitate. I messed up, he finally spoke, his words thick with guilt. I'm in trouble, Mom. I've been gambling. Online. I thought I could control it, but I can't. I've been lying to Jessica. I've been lying to everyone. Maggie's chest tightened. She had known deep down that something wasn't right, but hearing him admit it out loud, hearing the shame in his voice, felt like a punch to the gut. For so long she had given him everything. Every ounce of herself, every part of her love, and this is what it had come to. I don't know how to stop, Daniel continued, his voice cracking. I thought maybe I could handle it, but I'm losing everything. The house is behind on payments, Jessica's pissed. The kids don't understand. I don't know what to do, Mom. Maggie felt a pang of sympathy, but it was distant, like a shadow of the mother she used to be. She could hear the desperation in his voice, but the anger inside her was louder now. All these years, she had sacrificed everything for him, sacrificed herself, and now he was asking her to bail him out once again. She swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. I can't help you, she said, her voice firm, though the words felt foreign in her mouth. I can't fix this for you. Not this time. Daniel looked up, his face pale. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. I don't know where else to turn. The words stung, but they were also a reminder. He was asking her for the one thing she had always given, her financial support, her emotional support, her everything, and she had given it so freely, without thought, without hesitation. But now it was different. No, Maggie said quietly. You need to figure this out on your own. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but Maggie didn't flinch. She wasn't going to soften this time. She had given him every chance, every opportunity, and he had taken it all. I know you're scared, Maggie continued, her voice steady, though her heart was breaking. But you're not a child anymore. You need to face your mistakes. You need to fix this for yourself. He sat in silence for a long moment, his face buried in his hands. Maggie wanted to reach out to comfort him, but she stopped herself. She couldn't save him. She had already tried. She had already given everything, and it had never been enough. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I really am. But the apology didn't land the way it used to. It didn't hold the weight it should have. This time, Maggie didn't feel the relief she thought she would. Instead, she felt a quiet, growing resentment that she had been used, that she had allowed herself to be used for so long. Goodbye, Daniel, she said softly, standing up and walking toward the door. I hope you find your way. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just left, walking slowly to his car, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his choices. Maggie closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart thudding in her chest. The air in the room was thick with the tension of what had just happened. She felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had finally let him go, finally cut the last string that had held them together. But it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a quiet mourning, a realization that things would never be the same. How much longer can a mother give before she's left with nothing but regret? Can a relationship ever truly heal when the foundation of trust has been broken so deeply? In the silence that followed, Maggie didn't know what was next. But one thing was certain. This was her life now, and she was finally living it for herself. But as she looked out the window, watching Daniel's car disappear down the street, she couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning. Could he change? Would he ever understand what she had sacrificed? Or was this the final step in a journey of lost connections? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where Maggie must confront the truth about her role in Daniel's life and discover whether it's truly possible to rebuild what has been broken, or if some wounds are too deep to heal. Maggie spent the next few weeks alone, but it wasn't the kind of solitude she had once feared. It was different now, empowering in its quiet, full of space, where there had once been nothing but noise. Her days were her own again. She worked in her garden, rearranged the furniture, and spent long hours sewing, stitching together little pieces of her own heart. The online shop was growing slowly, and she found herself smiling more. For the first time in years, there was no one to need her, no one to disappoint. She was free. But even in freedom, the silence could be overwhelming. Late at night, when she lay in her bed, she would hear the faint sound of children's laughter in her mind. The boys, her grandchildren. She missed them, their small hands tugging at her sleeve, their laughter echoing through the rooms. She hadn't seen them in weeks, hadn't heard from Daniel or Jessica either. The decision to cut herself off had been deliberate, but it still weighed on her. She wanted to protect herself, but part of her longed for the days when the house had felt like a home filled with life. Then one morning, her phone rang again. She almost didn't pick it up, but something, some quiet, insistent pull, told her to answer. It was Daniel. "Mom," his voice sounded different. It was rougher, heavier, as though the weight of everything had finally caught up with him. "Can I come by?" Maggie closed her eyes for a moment. She had been preparing for this moment, had known it would come, but the truth was, she didn't know if she was ready. She had let him go. She had given him the space to find his way, to understand the consequences of his actions. But now, hearing the strain in his voice, she wondered if he truly had learned anything, or if he was just back because things had gotten too hard, too real. "Okay," she said, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. "Come over." He arrived an hour later, his car pulling up slowly in front of her house. Maggie opened the door, and there he was, older, warier. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale, but there was something different about him. The arrogance, the entitlement that had once defined him was gone. He looked like a man who had lost himself and was only now beginning to search for a way back. "I need to talk," Daniel said, his voice low and heavy. "I've been to those meetings, Mom. Gamblers Anonymous, every week. It's not enough, but it's something. I've stopped, but I don't know what to do next." Maggie swallowed. It was hard to hear him say those words, harder still to know that, in some twisted way, they might be true. But the reality was, she couldn't just fix him anymore. She couldn't step in and be the solution he had always relied on. She had done that her whole life, and look where it had gotten her. "Why are you here, Daniel?" Maggie asked, her voice steady, but filled with an undercurrent of something more. "What is it you need from me?" He looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I need help," he whispered. "Not money, not fixing things, but I need someone to believe in me again. I've hurt you. I know I have. I've ruined everything, but I don't know where to go from here. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to keep making the same mistakes. Can you help me figure this out?" Maggie stared at him, her heart heavy with a mix of sadness and something else, something close to relief. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, hoping that he would come to her and finally see the damage he had done. But now that it was here, Now that he was asking for something she couldn't give, she felt herself holding back. She could help him, yes, but on her terms. He had to prove to her that he was truly ready to change, not just for the sake of his family, but for himself. "I can't fix you, Daniel," she said quietly. "I can't make your choices for you, but I can be here. If you really want to change, you have to want it for yourself. You have to show me that you can stand on your own, that you can take responsibility for what you've done." Daniel nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I want to, Mom. I really do. I've hurt you so much. I don't know if I can ever make up for it, but I'll try. I'll do whatever it takes." Maggie took a deep breath. "Then start by proving it. No more asking for help. You figure it out. And if you fall, I won't be there to catch you. But I'll be here, watching, waiting to see if you can stand on your own 2 feet." The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that allowed for growth, for change. Maggie felt her walls slowly begin to crumble, but she didn't let them fall completely. This time, it was her turn to step back. Daniel stayed for a while, his eyes darting around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. Maggie watched him, her heart a mixture of hope and doubt. Could he really change? Or was this just another moment of desperation, a temporary fix until the next crisis? "I'm going to work," he said finally, standing up. "I'll get a job. I'll pay the bills. I'll do it right this time. I just need to figure out how." Maggie stood too, watching him head toward the door. "I believe you, Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to believe in yourself too." He paused, looking back at her, and for the first time in a long time, Maggie saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the one who had once dreamed big, the one who had been full of hope and potential. "I will, Mom," he said, his voice steady, though his hands were still trembling. "I will." As Daniel walked out the door, Maggie closed it behind him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like she had done the right thing. She had finally let go. But as the days passed, something shifted. The phone remained silent for days, then weeks. There were no calls, no desperate messages from Daniel. For the first time in years, Maggie felt a quiet relief in the absence. He had taken the first steps toward his own redemption, and now it was his turn to walk the path alone. Weeks later, Daniel called again, but this time his voice was different, stronger, clearer. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't desperate. He was steady. "Mom," he said, and Maggie felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I did it. I got a job. I'm paying the bills. I'm handling everything. I'm finally standing on my own." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes as she whispered, "I'm proud of you." How do you know when to let go and when to hold on? What happens when you give someone the space to find themselves, and they finally do? Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you felt moved by Maggie's journey, comment 100 to show your support. Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts with us. Feel free to share this video with your friends. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for being part of the Life Stories community.